На сцената е специалният ни гост Гордън Александър Кър, който ще представи своите идеи за това какви са възможностите пред България, докато се разместват тектоничните плочи. Сега предавам микрофона на Цвети и оставям дискусията в нейния.
С модерни продукти, иновативни зони за експресно банкиране, премиум центрове с обслужване на изключително ниво и един различен мобилен портфел. 30 години всяка постигната цел ни кара отново да надскачаме себе си, за да създаваме вселена от нови възможности за вас. 30 години Пощенска банка.
Здравейте пак след почивката. Now I would like to switch to English. I would like to thank our next guest for being here with us today, for coming especially for this event, and I would like to present him to you. Mr. Gordъn Кър's career can be divided in two parts. From the mid-80s until 2010, he worked for investment banks such as Bank of America, Nomura and Santander, designing and executing innovative securitization and derivative structures, latterly gaming the global rules of banking to engineer fake capital for banks, which I must admit makes me a bit uncomfortable, but I'm also curious to hear more about that in the presentation. Since 2010, he has been working for common partners, both writing and teaching about these matters, and also offering solutions to central banks and global institutions, such as the DIFI. He believes the euro is a failing currency and a political construct, and this also is something I believe we all are curious to hear more about. Welcome, Gordъn. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sessia. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm told I have to speak slowly. It's always my biggest drawback in life, so please just make a signal if I speed up. If it's okay, Sessia, I'll not talk about my crimes in terms of engineering fake capital today. My subject, as encouraged by Nadia, is all about digital finance, and frankly, the problems. I'm really going to talk about the UK because to cover 30 countries in Europe is too much for a 15-minute presentation. But although the structures in the UK are vastly different, because we don't have this IBAN numerical customer reference, we're pretty good at exporting initiatives in banking and digital finance. And so I think the rest of Europe should be on alert for these problems. But rather than just talk about problems, disasters, crises, I'm here to genuinely put a positive spin on this. The reason I spent so much time in Bulgaria, my first visit actually was July the 8th to 11th, 2011, and I met Simeon Yankov, your earlier speaker here in Sofia then as finance minister. But I've realized in the last 10 years that to be very positive, Bulgaria has had to kingdoms in the past, and this financial crisis in Europe is so severe. Bulgaria is in the best possible place. You're the richest country in Europe, you have the lowest debt. My neighbour in London bought the house next door to me. He has a Ferrari, a Porsche on the driveway, a €3 million mortgage. I drive a 14-year-old Audi. It looks quite good for 14 years, but I have no debts at all, no mortgage, so I think I'm richer. And this is the way I'd encourage Bulgarians to feel about themselves. I'll start with the title. There is a real impasse in stewardship. It's all about failed regulation. The idea that these regulators in fintech, central banks are looking out for the citizens of Europe is for the birds. The regulators, like most institutions, are primarily focused on their self-interest, and knowing full well that the disastrous decision to bail out the banks 14 years ago has resulted in, firstly, 2 years later, the sovereign debt crisis. Then we nearly have Greece falling apart in 2015. Too animated. I'm copying Kuzmin Iliev, where is he? Then we have Greece nearly falling out of the Eurozone. And now we have a situation which I have called out in recent writings where the European Central Bank has nowhere left to run. You can't look after the interests of Greece and Italy by keeping interest rates at zero or negative, and also satisfy Germany, Finland and the Netherlands by raising interest rates to control inflation. They are deep-sixed, as the politest way I can put it. Germany, I believe, is presently redesigning an alternative currency to the euro. They've reclaimed their famous gold reserves from New York. I spent a lot of time as a German fellow in our team. We've spent a lot of time with the German Parliament. Bob Linden, a close colleague, has been over to see the German Central Bank 2 years ago, discuss the ridiculous exposure in the Target 2 settlement system, which is basically financed by Germany, and of course they're in complete denial. We pitched several times. I don't think Germany is going to use cooperative partners, but I think we might be successful somewhere else. Let's just talk about the role of fintech, as if the policy issues that were discussed before the coffee break were not serious enough. Now we have this incredible belief that somehow digital finance, anything with a phone is going to be better than what we had before and improve things. I'm sorry, I believe the opposite to be the case, certainly in the UK. So up until 2009, immediately after the crisis, clearly with a raft of new regulations and great hope that measures were going to address the crisis, there was naturally a great surge in IT business, technology, in these four areas mainly. Glad I managed to drink without drowning the microphone. Customer services, financial services, compliance, and business processes. But within a year or two, the fintech industry sort of pivoted into where they thought there were easy pickings because they were at the same time lobbying for these fairly disastrous regulations such as open banking. So they moved into transactions, settlements, record keeping, payments, and I read the Bulgarian Fintech Association's 120-page report on the airplane over here yesterday. 64% of the Bulgarian fintech businesses are in payments. I'm sure you're doing it pretty well over here. I know Martin and Philip from Paysera, I've known them for 2 or 3 years. I think they're excellent men, so none of this is a criticism of you gentlemen. And alternative money systems, crypto. Well, from the very start of crypto, I've known it's just garbage. Crypto is just a series of little tulips. I'm lucky enough to have one of the great economists in the world on my team, Kevin Dowd, George Selgin, Larry White, so the three economists regarded as the leading monetary economists, thinkers of our time. Kevin and I co-authored a paper, Bitcoin Will Bite the Dust, in 2014. Okay, people laughed at me, for a while, but things go on. I'm reminded of a famous British comedian who sadly died 5 years ago. I don't know if you've ever heard of Bob Monkhouse. Bob Monkhouse, one of his famous quotes, shortly before he died at age 70, he said to the huge audience, when I was growing up, I told my friends I was going to become a comedian. They laughed at me. Ladies and gentlemen, they're not laughing now. Slides have just gone. I knew this would happen. Simon? You disconnected me. That's what I was saying. The central banks have disconnected me.
The Bitcoin enthusiasts.
The Bitcoin enthusiasts have disconnected me. Everyone disconnects me. I've had a problem in the wardrobe. I leave some clothes over here, and for 2 years, I couldn't touch my clothes, I couldn't travel, and when I came over, I said to my business partner, I couldn't smell the mothballs. What's the Bulgarian? I couldn't smell any mothballs. It's so difficult to pull their little legs apart. Senior, can we return? Well, I'll just carry on. I know what my slides say. Slides fetish, you pull the plug on me. So to recap, after the initial hope for fintech companies, then we had this pivot into payments, transactions. Oh, thank you. Just because I'm speaking English, I thought I would wait for the slides in case I'm speaking too fast. It's like my old car. I keep thinking I'm getting there and it breaks down again. Okay. Can I use it now, Simi? Simi, can I see your handsome face? Is that okay? Okay, so I'll go back. All right. This is where we were. So to summarise, having started with high hopes with fintech, I was enthusiastic too. Then we have this pivot and they start talking about digital assets and I get very concerned. So the problem in a nutshell is that the great financial crisis resulting in mass bank insolvencies has never been addressed. All that they've done is change the calibration. If you're a doctor and the patient is dying of a terrible fever, it's like changing the thermometer calibration so that although the temperature is 110, it still reads a healthy 90. So that's what we've done with the PAL rules and accounting rules. I've written extensively about it, all on the Colton Partners UK website. I won't bore you now. So central banks, for years, I read everything the Bank of England puts out and the European Central Bank. They were hating cryptocurrencies. But then, of course, as their own problems worsened, as the money printing increased, as it failed to produce any results, as Mario Draghi retired and abandoned all hope of Italy introducing legislative structural reforms and reducing spending, the same in the UK. There's no greater agenda here. The UK is just as bad. The only difference between the UK and Europe is we have one government with one taxing authority, and Europe, being fragmented, has problems. So the central banks then realised that there's going to be more bank runs when the continuing, I never talk about a new financial crisis, it's the same one. It has never been addressed. And when the crisis moves from being hidden or covert to out in the open or overt, people will panic and take their money out of banks in cash. So what a great idea, as the British Chancellor up until 2 weeks ago, Rishi Sunak, said, we have Bitcoin, let's have Bitcoin, let's abolish cash. The main aim of central banks embracing with love these digital tokens is so they can abolish cash and take interest rates back to zero and very, very negative. I've gone in writing, you might laugh at me again soon, saying the European Central Bank will never, ever raise interest rates materially above 1 or 2%. And if the natural rate for money is 7 or 8%, and you can prove this, there are websites where willing investors will lend money to willing borrowers and the average rates at that sort of level. They'll never go anywhere near that level because it will just cause too many problems with Italy in particular, one of the big six. So this is the reason why they want CBDC. But the problem now with digitized payments in the UK is they have imported 3 colossal problems. Never exaggerate, but these problems really are colossal. So just to summarise, one is the failing access to cash. So we have a huge reduction in bank branches, a huge reduction in ATMs. Everybody knows ATM cash machines. No ability for merchants to pay cash into a machine. Businesses have been lobbying for that for 10, 15 years, but that's been shut down on the grounds of money laundering and fraud. Well, hang on, the telephone. Criminals use the telephone to commit frauds, but we don't ban the phone for that reason. Secondly, authorised push payment fraud. This, I think, will come to Bulgaria soon. And finally, the The other massive problem is that when you pay by card, especially as a small business, the merchant in the UK is losing 3 to 8% of the face value when the regulations say 0.2, 0.3%. So the recommendation of this is that all transitioning, and I personally with my colleague Bob have written to the Bank of England 3 weeks ago, payment service regulation, reported to the Bank of England, copied several policymakers, all transitioning towards further digital payment must stop. I'd like you to go backwards, but I'm realistic. Just stop it now. Stop all this big bang. There's going to be a big bang in November. We don't need it. Just evaluate what's going on. Nobody wants cash to be abolished. And the House of Lords, quite a respected economic committee, they're one of the best groups of politicians in the UK. They produced a report in January this year that central bank digital currencies are a solution in search of a problem. So failing access to cash, the obvious problems of bank branch closures, end of ATMs, elderly and vulnerable people being scammed. I was telling people, I lost my mother 4 years ago, she was 91, no problem, but for the last 2 or 3 years, the amount of scams every day, and this is happening more and more in the UK. You know, we have probably something like 15% of the population aged 70 plus, and I don't know the statistics, but very few people I know are allowing their parents to keep plastic cards. That's a sad state of affairs, especially if cash is abolished. And then, of course, I made this brief comment that there is no possibility of any central bank digital currency being anonymous. All the research I've read proves they will always be able to. It will be impossible for them not to identify the payer. The government's already debating whether we should have extra controls, and the problem is I might like to thank Sessia for a wonderful presentation today. Take her out to a bar with some other friends who also might buy you a drink. I go back to my third drink, and they say, I'm sorry, your card doesn't work, you've had 2 drinks already. This could be the next stage of this totalitarian regime with central bank digital currencies. Very bad idea for democratic societies. Works great in China, I'll say no more. Authorised push payment frauds. Here we have a unique system in the UK, but it copies a lot of the data technology in Europe in a single Euro payment area, SEPA. We have this digital model, ISO 20022 XML, and this has been introduced into our direct bank-to-bank payment. So if I pay a bill to a friend of a sports club, £10, I go on my phone and pay it like everybody else. The problem is the system does not check the payee name to the instruction, which is very different from the rules that have applied in history in the UK. When you write a check out, if you write a check out to Martin Bogdanov and they pay it to the account of Cousin Iliev, the bank loses. Now in the UK, what happens, of course, is every email that you send is being read by scammers, and a typical example is a young person buying a house. So, you know, say even a small flat anywhere in the UK, €500,000, comes to 1 month before the purchase date, and the deposit of 10% has to be paid. Everybody's dealing now not with real solicitors, but with e-law firms. So you never meet the lawyer. The lawyer you deal with every day changes. Nobody gives their names. You just get an email format. The criminal copies the email format. He knows exactly what's going on. And the day before you're due to pay the deposit, the person gets an email from the Albanian criminal saying, you owe 10%, and it will be the exact amount, £49,745, paid to the name of the e-law firm, the correct name, but they substitute their numerical bank details. I gave a talk in 2 years ago in Tallinn, 4 years ago in Tallinn, sorry, and the scope of this fraud in the UK was 200 million, now it's 2 billion. This is going through the roof, push payment fraud. There's nothing the banking system wants to do about it. It's fixable, but they don't want to fix it at all. Then we have deductions of the face. The point I made earlier that there are caps that are stitched into EU regulations. 2015, this automatically became part of law. Nothing to do with Brexit in the UK. And the regulators just published a report last week, available on the website. I'll send the answers, but there's a digital payments website quite well read throughout Europe. I'll do an article about it. The payment service regulators just acknowledging that led by Visa and MasterCard, these huge deductions, 3 to 8%, are multiple factors above the law that no one's doing anything about it. There's always a minimum of 30 pence payment in the UK, so if you're lucky enough to find a cup of coffee for £1 somewhere, then you're losing 30% of that in digital payment fees. The solution for this, as we wrote this September, is just ice these two projects. There's meant to be a new transitioning of the data architecture into UK retail later on this year, and we have this open banking. I'll talk about open banking briefly because open banking was first conceived in the early 2010s and enacted into legislation about 2014-15 in the UK. The idea being that all the banks are failing, so let's have all these new fintech banks, let's have some new banks starting out with no legacy problems, and so these the law requires all the banks to provide access to supposedly authorised fintech companies, and all customer access data is provided. But of course, this is coincidentally simultaneous with the rise of all these frauds. And as I come on to, there's basically no hope of anti-money laundering and know your customer practices being provided in the UK by many of these organisations. The proof is the level of fraud. If anti-money laundering and know your customer works, then no fraudster, no Albanian criminal can set up a bank account in the UK. But people do, they get around the anti-money laundering very easily. In Europe, there wasn't much problem with anti-money laundering because of their Danske Bank. You're probably aware that their Danske Bank in Tallinn for 10 years was operating a supermarket for all the criminal money, all the mafia money, Europe just goes through in cash. They admitted that the EU authorities were aware of this for 6 years, did nothing about it. So open banking should be stopped. The original purpose to allow the failed zombie banks to die was obviously ended a long time ago. Central banks don't want the zombie banks to die. They want the zombie banks to survive, no matter how zombified. And now open banking has been transformed as an initiative by the payment politicians into a further drive for even more digital payments. Well, that's just going to increase the problems that I've been talking about. So the evaluation of the cash process is being corrupted in the present way because all the work on central bank digital currencies is being done by the same small digital payments industry based in Menlo Park, California, where Rishi Sunak is great friends. They don't want any of these problems to be solved. They have ensured that their people. By the way, I hate autocorrect. I hope you read me autocorrect. 3 times before I came, I tried placement. These are Visa and MasterCard people, all from Stanford, have been inserted onto the special technical committees. 2 committees, 20 people each. They're all connected to Visa and MasterCard. But autocorrect made placement, but it's placed men that would should be in the bottom line. And we've written to the Bank of England and politicians saying the processes have to be stopped. We need to have independent experts assessing the benefits of cash or the removal of cash. Because I'm telling you, the decisions have already been taken in the UK to abolish cash. But I'm confident that our little team, partners, may help to turn this tanker around. Independent published reviews by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority before the China takeover points out, as I said earlier, anonymity is impossible. And the other point that they make, which I urge you all to take away if I die in a bus accident going back to my hotel, even the Abbadites are saying, oh, let's get rid of cash. I never use cash, I use my card all the time. Well, we all do. But there is no logical relationship between the declining use of cash and the matter we're discussing today as to the importance of retaining cash. If there's a new over-banking crisis, believe me, if you've got €1 million or 100,000 euros in the bank, you'll want to get hold of it. Maybe 100,000 you're relying on the government guarantee, $1 million you might not be guaranteed. If cash disappears, you've had it. The accounts will be frozen. So the solutions to the points I just mentioned are quite straightforward. For the authorised push payment fraud, require the payment service providers, that's a general term for all the banks, all the fintechs, all the DIFIs, all the e-money licensed operators, everybody who's been sandboxed. By the way, do you know that Revolut is still sandboxed in the UK? So they benefit from light touch regulation, they don't have to comply with the same rules as the big banks. Require these people to cover the fraud as if it was a check, as before. They'll soon fix the problem. After 8 years, we have this so-called contingent reimbursement model, which they spent a long time working on just to justify not reimbursing people when the Albanian criminal intercepts the deposit payment for the new house. The solution to the deductions from face, just simply assert the law, make it quite plain. There's a reason for the EU law. I'm a big fan of many aspects of the EU. It's a very good law to say that no more than 20 basis points, 0.2%, can be deducted for face for a debit card payment 0.3% for a credit card payment. And also, there's lots of other rules here that if you have scheme management connected to the infrastructure, that was something the EU objected to. The UK just allows that to happen. And furthermore, accounting for small businesses has become very difficult. Imagine you're a shoe company selling spares, a pair of 500 euro high heels every 6 months, and there are 20 young ladies that come into the shop. The problem is that if all the shoes, for example, cost the same price, you'll get a batch of 20 payments for 500 euros, 10,000 euros will come in, but it won't get 10,000 euros. It will come in days 2, 3, 4, and 5. 2,400 one day, 3,000, and there'll be different deductions from each of the payment service providers, and there's no way that the merchant can work out what's going on without keeping ridiculous amounts of records. Whereas the laws are easily there, the payment providers have the ability to put more information into the readout they give to the merchant, so you can identify a transaction number against the pair of shoes purchased. Accounting and bookkeeping has become very difficult for British merchants. Buy more shoes. And then ATMs, this is a slightly more difficult solution, so I should go slowly, but in the UK we've got a real problem with bank closures. I mean, it's checked. I live in London, quite a busy part of North London, but I used to have 4 banks in the high street I could use. Now I have to drive about 5 kilometres to the nearest bank. They're shutting down banks so quickly. And it's easy to see why, because even under the generous accounting rules, even under the generous Basel III capital rules, which claim to show bank solvency, even under that, banks are struggling to produce any form of account to show solvency. So a great way to show solvency is to shut down your branches, let go of staff. That saves big money and just keeps you going another year longer. And of course, the problem with that is that the problem with that is that there's an organisation called Link. Up until 20 years ago, I'm a Lloyds Bank customer, I could only use a Lloyds Bank ATM. 25 years ago or so, an organisation called Link was formed, and they've kind of been financing the infrastructure. In the UK, the ATM Link infrastructure, meaning that I can take money out of a Barclays or an RBS account, the fixed infrastructure costs £5 billion a year. I don't know how many bank branches were shut, but probably about a third or even half of all bank branches 10 years ago are now closed. And that means that this infrastructure's got a fixed cost so high that Link itself have published a report saying it's non-viable, they're losing a fortune, and they kind of think that cash will finish in 5 years' time just because of ATMs. So banks should be penalised for shutting branches. They're sitting there quite happily saving the money from closing the branch and telling their customers to go and use Barclays branch, my Lloyds Bank is. So the big banks should pay more and more fees to support the ATM structure if they're shutting branches. Quite an easy rule. So to conclude, sadly, all digital payments are much slower than cash, much more costly, 8% for face compared to 100% for the shoe seller, and very problematic for merchant bookkeeping. And I'm sorry to say, all my life I've been told just to argue the issues, play the ball, not the man. But now with these 2 committees making all the decisions, politicians are the same everywhere, in Europe, in the UK, in the US. Politicians will never express a view on something regarded as technical. They won't express a view on how to solve brain cancer. They will leave it to a committee of medical experts. They won't express a view on COVID, they leave it to the experts. They won't express a view on technical payments issue, they leave it to the experts. If all of the experts are connected to Visa and MasterCard, there is very little hope for the future. This is a great opportunity for Bulgaria to step forward. These problems are going to be even worse in Europe because you don't even have the payee name. A digital payment in Europe is simply the IBAN number, 20 digits of the payer, the IBAN number of the payee, and the amount. Even if you pass the strongest laws requiring the payment service provider to check for anti-money laundering and everything else, they couldn't do it. All they can do is the payer can check that, especially that is your IBAN number. The payee, the shoe shop can check that that's their number. There's no actual checks for money laundering going on. And then we have this problem in Europe of virtual payment service providers. This is becoming huge. Virtual payment service providers means you have an umbrella payment service provider, an e-money company, that issues one single IBAN to a different payment service provider. So a new fintech company sets up and he attracts 2,000 customers. Many of these will be fraudsters. They all use the same IBAN number. So it's absolutely impossible in Europe to do know your customer and anti-money laundering checks. So the whole system of virtual payment service providers, because if the merchant that you're buying the shoes from has an account with one of the new second level payment service providers, he'll be using the same IBAN number as 900 other merchants, some of whom may not be the most genuine people. And it's possible for the head level, the primary payment service provider to do it. So virtual payment service providers, you're going to have a growing amount of fraud. So Bulgaria, with its strongest currency, the currency board in Europe, I refer you to the BBC website. I was involved in organising a 9-minute BBC World Service programme celebrating 25 years, recording the phenomenal achievements of your central bank here and Steve Hank here and others. It's on the University National World Economy website, broadcast August 22nd, 9 minutes. Already listened to, it's radio, 50 million people worldwide. Bulgaria has got this phenomenal track record of financial rectitude, skills, confidence. Just show a bit of confidence, step forward into this regulatory breach and try to calm down all this fraud. Otherwise, you'll think that the industry is life for sale. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, very interesting. I don't know if you're familiar that I'm working for the banks with all your presentation against banking and digital, etc. I'm kidding, very interesting. Really, it's every coin has two sides, always. There are always positive sides in cash, positive sides in digital. We cannot say it's not black or white, in my opinion, at least. So we should carefully consider what are the pros and the cons. I would like to ask our audience whether you have some questions for our speaker, or comments or anything. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the thought-provoking presentation. Some of the issues probably we're kind of evolving and they sound very advanced for us, but you're obviously at the cutting edge. One question regarding open banking. The US has experience in having open banking for decades. And there probably they have also fraud problems and similar things, but it seems to have also benefits, like a customer being able to check various bank accounts, to do interbank things. So is there a positive about it, because you also spoke against open banking, if I understood correctly?
I'm not speaking against open banking. I'm speaking against the corruption of the way open banking was intended to operate in the UK and the way it's operating now. The difference between the UK and America is that in America, several thousand banks are allowed to go bankrupt and disappear every year. That shows how open banking is operating in a healthy way. It's designed to flush out the zombies and send them to their early graves, shut the terribly creative destruction. But in the UK, you have 98% of all banking business operated by 5 banks. I mean, look at the market capitalizations I checked this morning. People talk about banks being recapitalized. Look at the market capitalization, not the book value. So the combined share price of the 5 banks in the UK, Barclays, Lloyds, RBS, HSBC, and Standard Chartered, December 2006, just before, as we know, they all crashed. The market capitalization was 346 billion. The latest data I've got was just before the pandemic. In March 2020, nothing to do with the pandemic. The total market capitalization of the same 5 banks, despite their bar ratios going from 8 to 19%, and the bank leaders saying, look how healthy they are, the market capitalization of these banks was 139 million, down by nearly 2/3. Investors know these banks are insolvent, but that doesn't happen in the US. In the US, you have big banks, you have a network of banks. So, and especially, I'm not against digital payments. Of course, I love making digital payments on my phone. But I would never buy a house on my phone because I know that the money purchased stolen goods will be fraud. What I'm saying is that there's a huge hole here in regulation. The regulators, the Bank of England, the politest way to put it is they've got Stockholm syndrome. They've fallen in love with the organisations they're supposed to be regulating. They can't seem to object to anything. It's worth reading the Payment Service Regulator reported last week. He's basically saying all these rules have been broken. So what? What's the point of having laws if you just let Visa and MasterCard make their own rules?
Understood. And one more question. You mentioned you cannot explore 30 countries in Europe. You spoke about UK, but the European Central Bank is also doing these digital currency initiatives and pilot projects. And how do you evaluate the digital euro efforts